Good day, everyone. Welcome to week two of the PMGT1865, the Project Time, Cost, and Resources course. My name is Dr. Kumaran Murugan, and along with Dr. Jin Shu, we will guide you through this week content, focusing on project scheduling and the critical path method, or simply called the CPM. Let's get into the class now. Thanks. In this session, what we'll do is we'll look into the project schedule and the WBS, which is called the work breakdown structure, in detail, and we'll go through the CPM and the Gantt charts. By the end of today's session, hopefully, you should be able to understand the concept and structure of a work breakdown structure, explain the process of scheduling in a project environment, identify different schedule formats used in industry, apply the 5 scheduling process, including the use of critical path method, interpret, and develop a Gantt chart to visualize your project timeline. We are now looking at the schedule overview. In the introduction class of week one, we covered project planning, introducing the project management methodologies, 5 stages of life cycle, the knowledge areas, project planning and scope. In today's class, we will explore the project scheduling. Project scheduling is a fundamental planning activities that translate the project scope into a time-based sequence of activities. It is where we begin to understand not just what needs to be done, but when and in what order. Let's explore how this works, starting with the WBS. Okay, let's see what is a work breakdown structure is. A work breakdown structure is a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to accomplish the project objectives. It breaks down the deliverables into manageable sections, ensuring all elements of scope are captured and organized. The WBS serves as the foundation for subsequent planning steps such as scheduling and budgeting. Commonly, it is presented as either an intended list or a tree structure. We'll show how it's represented in the following slides. Now look at the example of construction of a house. Look how different phases like the internal foundation and external are differentiated to different work packages, or can be called as work stream, and further into activities and into tasks. This is how a WBS looks into, and this is how you are going to create activities and tasks. WBS can also be shown in list format. Look at the activities required for the construction of a house in Blacktown. We have given you as an example. So you see the phase one planning, which has different activities, which is meet client, submit plans to the council, obtain DA approval. And the phase two of the work package is implementation. You do the site preparation, foundation work, structural and internal work such as plumbing, electrical, and painting. And finally, the project closure, which is the phase three. It shows you the contract closure, review, archiving. These are all the work packages or the phases that you need to go, like the high level phases. You have to add more tasks. What are the specific tasks that the person or something has to be actioned? The activity should be further broken down into specific tasks. Thank you. Here's another example, the WBS for the same housing project, but as a tree format. It follows a logical breakdown into 3 major phases: planning, implementation, and closure. Each phases contain work packages that capture specific deliverables. The same WBS is shown in 2 formats: first as an hierarchical list, and then as a tree diagram. This flexibility in format helps cater to different stakeholders. The revised WBS uses subcategories. If you look at the more detail at the level, at different level, you have subcategories within the implementation phase. For example, focus on the implementation phase to enhance clarity and manageability of work activities. It introduced categories like prep work, which is a preparation work, structural work, internal work, and finishing touches, grouping with related activities together while maintaining control and accountability. Okay, let's see what WBS levels are. What level of WBS or what level we can go to define your activities and tasks. Deciding how many levels to include in a WBS depends on how much control and details you require. Typically, a WBS has several levels. with the most common probably having 3 to 6 levels. The levels represent the project deliverables, phases, and work packages, with each level providing more detail than the one above. The lowest level should be the point at which one individual or team can be held accountable for the deliverable. This level is referred to as work package or work stream, and it is here that we define activities, assign resources, control time, and cost. In this diagram, you see how a project can be broken down through various levels. So if you look at the arrow, which is why you are doing it, and then how you are doing it. So the activities and the action of how is on the lower level, and why you are doing, like an objective, what you want to achieve, or the work package or the phase is on the higher level. So through the various level, you see the phases, deliverables, components, control accounts, work packages, activities, and finally tasks. This is how you differentiate, and this is called your work breakdown structure. What is important is not the labels, but the structure enables clear planning, accountability, and traceability. There are several important rules when you're developing a WBS. Each level must include 100% of the work required for the level above. You should research as much as information about the activities and tasks to complete the work packages. This can be done by various methods like looking into past projects, asking contractors or subcontractors what are the activities involved, and this is also able to avoid duplication of work across different categories, avoid single child categories, which is one within one structure. Each activity must have one parent category, and don't base the structure or chronology, sorry, or resource. Those are handled later through the scheduling and resource assignment. Remember to include project management activities in WBS, such as planning, reporting, and closure. Use a top-down or bottom-up approach depending on your team's knowledge. Activity description should start with verbs to clearly indicate the action. You can stop decomposing the WBS when tasks are assigned and measurable, either at the work package level or further down. And in this, establishing a dependency. So establishing a dependency is about how you're going to establish different dependency with different tasks. A work breakdown structure and the schedule are both essential project management tools, but they serve different purposes. The WBS focus on what needs to be done, breaking down the project scope into manageable deliverables. The schedule, on the other hand, focus on when and how these deliverables will be achieved, outlining the sequence of timing of tasks. This is why you need to know the dependency of different tasks. Establishing the task dependency is the major step in scheduling. Dependency reflects the logical sequence of tasks, determining which task must start or finish before the other one. This ensures what work progresses smoothly and effectively. Once dependencies are identified, we develop the schedule. Developing a schedule involves breaking down a project into manageable tasks, estimating their duration, and sequencing them in a logical order to create a timeline. This includes visual tools such as the network diagram and the Gantt charts or the bar charts. However, our ability to compress the schedule is often constrained by logical sequence and activity duration, resource availability, and imposed deadline. Let's look at activities estimate. When estimating activity duration, it's essential to involve the person performing the work. So it's basically if contractors or subcontractors or actual person who is going to be involved in the project, in the activity, you have to get them involved. This builds commitments and improves accuracy. There are two main types of estimate. One we have is a duration based, simply but less detailed. And the other one is effort based, more precise and flexible, especially using for cost control and resource planning. Estimate should usually be aggressive, but make sure it's very realistic. Let's look at schedule now. Schedule can be presented in a several format like table, milestone chart, network diagram, and Gantt chart. You can see how different charts have been represented in the example given. Each has its own strength. and weaknesses. For detailed sequencing and float analysis, I'll explain as we go further what float analysis is, and network diagrams are pretty much the ideal one. For visual communication with stakeholders, if they want to see some colorful idea, colorful looks, then Gantt chart is preferred. Let's look at the key terminology of scheduling. Key terms to understand include dependency, which is again a logical relationship between different tasks. And what is the other one is the milestone, which are key checkpoints. And float, as I said before, it's how much an activity can be delayed without affecting the project. I'll go further into float when we talk about the critical path method. And then there is critical activities, those with no float. And you cannot float means it's how much time you can wait to start another task. That's what the float is. And then the critical path, the longest path through the network determining the total project duration. We'll go through the critical path as we go further. Once we finish the project scheduling, we'll talk about the critical path method, and you'll understand how critical path method is important to a project. Now, let's develop a schedule. So developing the schedule involves 5 steps process or phases. The first one is define activities, which is based on your WBS, the work breakdown structure. And then you have to sequence your activities. The second phase is your sequencing activities, which is establishing logical order using a network diagram. And then your phase 3 is about estimating the activity resources, considering who's doing the work and their skill sets. And then you provide how many resources you need to achieve the task. And then you estimate the activity duration, which is your fourth phase, which is account for effort, lead times, and lag times. And then at the final one, you develop the schedule, which conduct forward and backward passes, identify flow, determine the critical path, and produce a Gantt chart. This is the important thing why you are developing a schedule. You need to conduct forward pass and backward pass, which we'll explain in the following slide. You need to identify the float, which is the duration you can lag or you can wait till you start the next task. You determine the critical path and produce a Gantt chart. This is the exact reason why you are developing a schedule. Okay, let's see how we define a task. As I said before, all tasks has to be identified through your WBS. Your work breakdown structure will help you to determine what are the activities and tasks you need to do to complete the work package and the phases of your project. This first step is developing a schedule is identifying activities. Identify all tasks needed to complete the project. This involves breaking down the project into smaller, manageable units of work, often using the WBS. Activities are further broken down of the work packages. What we are discussing here are the actual actions to be taken by an individual or group that can be measured to determine the current state subjectively and not objectively. It is imperative that the work defined here is something that can be measured. Once work packages, activities, tasks are defined, it's good practice to assign unique IDs to each WBS. Now, let's see the sequence of activities. Once activities and tasks are defined, the next step is to identify how they relate to each other. Sequencing activities is nothing but defining logic. Defining how WBS items are to be ordered logically. This step establishes dependencies between tasks. There are many aspects to using the right logic type within a schedule. This involves figuring out which activities must be completed before others can start, like we call it predecessors, which can run concurrently or parallelly, which can only start after another activity finishes, which we call successors. So keep in mind predecessor, parallel, and successors. These are the key terms in here. In project scheduling, each activity is represented by a node containing key scheduling parameters. If you look at the table, you see early start, early finish, late start, late finish, and flow. And it also shows duration, activity ID, and description. These are the elements of an activity. Okay, let's see what the role of node is. In the precedence diagram method, each activity is represented by a node, a small box containing key scheduling information. The example on the slide shows a standard node structure used in CPM, the critical path method diagram. Each node contains activity ID, a unique code for easy reference, and then the activity description. It says a short and clear statement of the task, and then it says the early start, the earliest time an activity can begin. And early finish is obviously the earliest time the activity can be completed. And you can also see late start, late finish. Late start is about the latest possible start time without delaying the project. And the late finish is the latest possible finish time without delaying the project. You can also see float. Sometimes it's called slack. It's as it the word means, it's the amount of time an activity can be delayed without affecting the overall schedule. And the final one is the duration, is obviously the expected time required to complete the activity. Now, let's see how this the work breakdown structure item can be converted into the node like a table and assigning the activity ID and the activity description. So all we have to do in the first phase of sequencing the activity is to identify the item shown in the WBS, put it in the activity description of each node and provide the activity ID. So this is how we define the activity or sorry the items in an activity or a node. Based on this, we should be able to then sequence the activities. Right. Once we identified the nodes, putting all the item, WBS item into a node and the scheduling information, just like the activity ID and the activity description, you need to now organize the activity in a logical form. Now that we know what information goes inside each node, our next step is to arrange these nodes into a logical flow. This is where the sequencing really comes alive. One of the left side, if you look at the left side of the slide, you can see a set of yellows activity node, each representing one WBS task or an activity from our project. Now our goal is to connect these into a network diagram that reflects the actual flow of work. A network diagram visually represents the sequence of activities and the dependencies. This diagram helps to understand the flow of work and identify bottlenecks. Pretty much you need to know what activities and how they're logically. So if you come from a construction engineering background or construction management, you know how to build a house. You need to have a foundation, you need to have frames. Frames cannot happen before foundation, so you need to know a basic logical understanding of the activities. So that's how this sequencing activities and the diagram, network diagram will help you to do that. Now, this is how you develop a network diagram. You define which activities goes first and which activities will follow. You will also analyze which activities you can merge or differentiate, or they call it burst, and assign. Why is this a critical step? Without proper sequencing, we risk identifying an unrealistic or inefficient project schedule. Poor sequencing can cause bottlenecks, idle resources, or missed deadlines. So the correct sequencing enables us to identify the critical path, the sequencing of activities that determines the minimum project duration, also for creating a realistic and achievable schedule. Alright. The step 3 of sequencing scheduling development is about estimating resources. So once you identify the resource needed for each activity, including your personnel, equipment, materials, and facility, you need to put that into how these resources can be assigned to each activities. These steps involve assigning the type and the quantity of resources required for each task. Now look at the activity description and the resources column. You are now to record how many people and with what kind of skills and set is needed for each work. You will require to balance time, cost, and quality in order to finish your project quicker, manage cost, and produce a better product. Now, the step 4 is about estimating duration. Once activities are defined and sequenced, estimate how long each activity will take to complete. This step utilizes historical data, expert judgment, or other estimation techniques to determine the durations. You're now looking at how each item of the WBS has been identified with the resources, what type of resources is required, and their specific duration to complete the task. Let's see in this slide. Now let's look at the final and major phase of step in developing the schedule. This step involves transferring activity duration into the network diagram, conduct forward and backward pass. I'll explain what forward and backward pass in the following slides. Calculate the amount of float. As I explained before, a float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without affecting the overall schedule on each activity. And then we determine the critical path, and finally we convert the information into a Gantt chart. Let's now see how the activity's duration are transferred into the network diagram. Can you see the duration cell just below the activity description? The time required to complete the task or the activities are identified. This is the very first step in developing the schedule. Once the duration has been transferred, now the focus is on conducting the forward pass in critical path identification or the method. It's to scheduling the calculate the early start and early finish for each activities. Mostly in project scheduling process, the forward pass calculates the earliest possible start and finish time for project activities, while the backward pass determines the latest allowable start and finish times. In this slide, we will perform the forward pass. So let's calculate each activities like early start and early finish. We start at the leftmost node where it says ES, which is the early start, and EF, early finish. So we usually start for the first activities, it's always 0. The early start is always 0. Then move through the network left to right. The rule is simple. Early finish equals early start plus your duration. So when an activity has multiple predecessors, its early start is the highest early finish of all predecessors. So let's look at number 1.01 activity. So it's a start node. Let's set the seed there, which is the client meeting. The early start is 0, which is a given. So the project haven't started. The project starts with the client meeting. So the early start is 0, but the duration of the meeting is 10 days. So what is the early finish? Early finish equals early start plus duration, which is 0 plus 10, which is 10. So write this inside the node, top left 0 and bottom left has 10. So now carry early for finish equals 10 forward to the next connecting node. If you look at the next connecting node is plans to council. So the immediate successor is the plans to council. And in that case, the early start equals early finish of predecessor, which is 10, and the duration of this activity, what we found is 20. So the early finish is going to be 10 plus 20, which is 30. Now put that 30 into the early finish of that second activities, and that becomes forward to its successor. And if you look at the third, there will be a parallel branches that takes you to DA approval and engage builders. So these two can be simultaneously worked on, and the current duration of DA approval is 60, and the early start can be 30 because your 30 is plans to council. Unless you finish your predecessor, which is plans to council, you can't start DA approval. So that's how you calculate your early start is 30 for DA approval, and it's the same thing for engaging your builder, same 30. But because DA approval takes 60 days, your early finish will be 90 days. But for builder, you can finish within 15 days. So your early finish is 45. But because the highest early finish of those activities without DA approval, you can't go and build your site. You have to wait till that 90 days when you get your, so that's become your highest duration to wait for the next activity. Both EF value continues to their downstream activities. Now look at number 4, like let's go to site preparation, a branch leading to foundation. The site preparation becomes your second activity, which is 2.0.1. In this slide, it receives early start from the DA approval, which is your 90, which is your highest days. And then for site preparation, we gave 3 days. Your early finish become 90 plus 3, 93. Once the site preparation is done, you pour your foundation, then it becomes 93 plus 2 days for pouring foundation, 95 is your early finish, and so on. If you look at all, that's how you keep building your activities. So, what is the key takeaway of doing this from transition is now that we have completed the forward pass and established the early start and early finish, our next step is to do a backward pass to compute the last finish and the last start and the last finish, because now we have identified all the early start and early finish. Why now we need to determine the last start and last finish, then derive each activities, its float, and identify the critical path. I'll show that in the next slide with this exact nodes value, so you guys can see how early start, early finish, and late start, late finish combine to reveal which activities cannot be delayed. Okay, so this slide shows the backward pass. So in project scheduling, once we identify activities, the sequence, resources, and duration, we move on to the developing schedule. And in the backward pass, a key step is determining the latest possible start and finish times for each activity without delaying the overall project. So let's understand the backward pass goal. So why do we do backward pass? Is to calculate the latest finish and the latest start time for each activities. So as like for early start, we have early start, early finish plus the duration. But for late start, you got to minus your duration with your late finish. This means you subtract your duration of the task from its latest finish time to find when it can start without delaying the project. So the next step is the process which start from last activity in the project. In this case, if you look at the closure, so we'll start from the last. So you need to identify from the last. The last activity is closure, which is last finish equals early finish is 134 days. So you go to now move backward to the network diagram. Carry the last start of each activity backward to become the last finish of its predecessors. So let's look onto the burst activities. One activity leading to several others is what the burst activity is. So, okay, let's choose the lowest late start among the successor to set the late finish for each predecessor. This ensures we meet the most urgent branch of work. And the next step is to interpret the box. So if you look at each yellow left, earliest start and top right is about the latest start, and the bottom left and bottom right is earliest finish and latest finish respectively. And as you know, the middle is about activity ID, duration, flow, right? So let's look at a example. So let's copy it like 97. It's Now, let's look at 2.06, for example. In this, early start is 97 days, and then the late finish is 100 days. And then the late start is 103 days, and earliest start is 97. So basically, the duration is 3 days. Your early finish can be only 100 days, but your late finish becomes 100 plus 3, which is your 103. And how would we visually flow this? Let's put a blue arrow indicating activity dependency, which is a logical sequence. So you have to have client meeting in order to go to plan council and then to DA approval and engage builders and so on and so forth. So numbers in the red circle is in the diagram highlight key calculation elements. So which is the LF, which is latest start, latest finish, and the box legend on the right shows the where earliest start, earliest finish, late start, late finish, duration, and flow are located. What is the key takeaways from this class? So from this chart is the backward pass ensures we know the latest possible schedule without delaying the end date. It identifies total float, time flexibility. It helps pinpoint critical activities where float is zero, meaning any delay delays the project. In the given network, the process starts at the closure, which is 134 days of late finish, and moves backward. In project management, developing the schedule is a critical step that transforms activity definitions, sequences, resources, and durations into an actionable project timeline. The diagram presented is a part of critical path method process where each activity is analyzed for timing, dependencies, and flow. Understanding the context. Our goal here is to determine the timing of each activity, identify the critical path, and calculate the float for each activity. In project scheduling process, float, which is also called as slack, is amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project finish date or the start date of dependent activity. There are actually two types of float. One is total float and free float. Total float is the maximum time a task can slip before it affects the project completion date. So it is the maximum time a task can slip before it affects the project completion date. To calculate the total float, subtract task's early finish EF date from its latest finish. It looks like latest finish minus earliest finish equal your total float. Alternately, you can subtract the task early start date from its latest start date, and that gives you the float date. Both of these formula will give you the task float rate. The second type is the free float type. It's calculated by subtracting the task earliest finish date from its earliest start date. The formula looks like earliest start minus earliest finish is your free float. The amount of time a task can slip before it delays the next activity regardless of the project finish date. So how would we calculate float? So the float formula is late start minus the early start. Latest time an activity can start without delaying the project. A float of 0 indicates the activity is on critical path. So you cannot delay that activity. So that's on 0. Any delay here delays the whole project. In the diagram, the float are visually easy to spot. Numbers in red circle, it's because everything is 0. So whatever is in the 0 float, it is the critical path. So for example, if you see 1.01, which is your first activity, which is client meeting, ES is 0, LS is 0, float is obviously 0, which is a critical path. Now let's talk about project flow. So the blue arrows represent the dependencies activities, which must follow their predecessors. And for example, client meeting, uh, the plan to counsel has to be started after the client meeting. And following the plans to counsel, it has to split into two different activities, which is DA approval and engage builders. Activities converge and branch out, showing parallel work like plumbing, kitchen, electrical. So how would we find the critical path here? Critical path activities have 0 float, as I said, and are essential to monitor closely because you cannot delay any of those activities. In the image, many activities starting from client meeting through move in and closure or on the critical path. So look at the float value of 0. So what's the key learning point is the purpose is to develop this schedule integrates all prior planning steps into a timeline. Float, knowing float always and all allows flexibility in scheduling non-critical activities. Critical path can be determined minimum project duration and where delays matter the most. And you can visualize through arrows, they indicate the sequence and concurrency of tasks. That's the purpose and key takeaway of float calculation in project scheduling. All right, let's see how we can do the critical path calculation. So the critical path method is a technique used to identify the longest sequence of dependent tasks, the critical path, that must be completed on time to finish the entire project. It is the longest path through the project network, representing the minimum time required to complete the project. So let's see how the step one is to identify all activities and dependencies. From the network diagram, you can see the activity ID 1.01, which is the client meeting. Then it follows through 1.02, the plans to counsel, then to DA and engaging your builder. And then it flows from DA approval to coding foundations up until build frame and plumbing, kitchen, painting, and so on and so forth. So all you list every path from start to finish so we can compare duration in the latest stage. So the next step is to perform the forward pass as we saw previous slides. It's about calculating your early start and early finish. So you have done your early start and early finish, so you can continue this forward through diagram until the final in early finish is found. So in this case, we know it's 134 days. That's the total project duration. So, and we also done the backward pass in the previous slide. It's about calculating your latest start and latest finish, which again, the duration becomes your latest start is 129. So this process moves backward until all latest start and latest finish values are filled. So now we need to calculate the float. The float for each activities, the formula we have already seen is about latest start minus your earliest start. That's your float. That's how you get your critical path activity. Now you look at the client meeting 1.01. The latest start is obviously 0 and the early start is 0. So the float is 0. So that's the critical. It hasn't started. But if you look at 1.04 and engaging your builder, the latest start has to be 45 and the earliest start is 30. Now the float becomes 45 minus 30 is 15, which is not a critical one. So identifying the critical path is follow activities with float 0 from start to finish. So that is the key of identifying your critical path. So from the diagram, the critical path now is 1.01, then it goes to 1.02, and then 1.03, and then 2.02, and 2.03, 2.06, 2.08, 2.09, 2.11, 2.12, and finally 2.13, and then the closure. This path equals total project duration of 134 days and has no slack. So no float on that. So it has to be the project start and finish has to be within that 134 days. And let's see how we can verify it. If you add up durations along the critical path, you should get 134 days matching the project length in the forward pass. This confirms the correctness. So now you see the red arrow, which is all indicating your critical path. So when you do this calculation, all you have to find is the float 0. The float 0 determine your critical path. Now, let's see how we can convert this information into the Gantt chart. So Gantt charts are widely used visual tools that show task duration and overlaps over time. They are easy to interpret but do not always show task dependencies unless enhanced by software. Most project management tools now support dynamic Gantt chart with dependency links. Let's see how the activity of engaging builder is indicated in this chart. So I've taken only one activity, which is the engaging builder. So this diagram builds on the earliest step of determining project start, finish times, floor, and the critical path. Now the goal is to convert the scheduling information into a Gantt chart, which kind of represent a visual timeline of project activities. So the number one step is from the network diagram to timeline. Previously, we calculated the early start, early finish, float, and latest finish. This information is now translated into the Gantt chart, which aligns tasks along a calendar so you can see when each activity can occur and how they can overlap. Now let's see how we can read the Gantt chart vertical axis. So list all project activities grouped by phases, which is your planning, your construction, your closure, as we saw in the previous example. And on your horizontal axis shows the project timeline in days and weeks. And if you look at the bar, you see blue bar and the red bar. The blue bar segment represent the activity early start to early finish ideal timeline. The red segment is your float. The float period where the activity can be delayed without affecting the project end date. So look at the dates. The dates on top track exact calendar placement of activities. So let's look at an example of engaging this builder 1.04 activity. From the original network diagram, we know the early start is 30, early finish is 45, float is 45, and the latest finish is 90 days. So in the Gantt chart, the blue bar covers days 30 to day 45, which is your planned duration. The red bar extends from day 45 to day 90, which is your flow. You can delay your activities from 45 to 90. That is your maximum flow time. This shows that the engaged builder can start later than 30 but no later than 75 to finish the project or the latest finish by 90 days without delaying the project. So now linking to critical path. How would we link to the critical path? Activities with no red bar or no float are on the critical path because we know float 0 is your critical path. So delaying them delays the entire project. Activities with red bar have flexibility from rescheduling its resource need to be allocated. So now you see when you know the critical path, you can see which resource or which activities can be worked on depending on the resource you have. And the next step is why this step is important. Let's see why visual clarity is important, because managers and teams instantly see the schedule in time order. It's easy to visualize us, so how my project is, where we can work on the resources. So overlapping identification, basically you look at parallel activities becomes obvious, allowing you better resource allocation. And we can do better risk management. So the flow periods highlight where delays are tolerable versus where they are dangerous. And you can also track your progress. Actual progress can be compared to the planned timeline for control purposes. But in summary, this Gantt chart transforms raw scheduling data from the network diagram into a practical time-based visual tool, making it easier for teams to understand the plan, coordinate efforts, and track execution. Now, let's summarize the Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a visual project management tool that displays the project's tasks, timelines, and dependency in an horizontal bar chart. And it is important because provides a clear at a glance view of the project schedule, helping teams plan, track progress, and manage resources effectively. What are the key components? The key components are task, timeline, bars, dependencies, milestones. So the task, individual task activity that needs to be completed can be shown. The timeline is an horizontal axis representing the project duration. Bars, red and blue, it represents the duration of each task. Dependency like lines or other indicators showing how each task relate to each other. And finally, the milestone, which is the significant points of achieving in the project. Finally, to conclude, we now understand the concept and structure of a work breakdown structure, or the WBS, the process of scheduling in a project environment. We know different stages of project scheduling and how to apply the 5-step scheduling process. We learned how to identify the critical path method on project activities, interpret and develop a Gantt chart to visualize project timelines. By this, we conclude the session. Please feel free to post your questions to me or Dr. Jing Xu. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful day.